All right, welcome to Agile with Norman. Today we're going to be talking Kanban. Before we get into it, though, I do want to talk a little bit about Kanban because Kanban can end up being two things from my experience. You can have people using Kanban as a board, a Kanban board only, and you can also have people using Kanban as a framework or a method. So it's important to know the two differences, and we're going to be focused on the method here, so we'll get into that more. But just something worth noting when people are talking about Kanban, you might want to know if they're doing a board or if they're doing the method. So let's jump into it. So first up, one of the big things that always comes up when you start talking about Kanban is, when should I do Kanban versus Scrum? And this is a great question. And the reality is both of these frameworks can handle any type of work, but they're better suited for certain things. So first up, Kanban, it's better suited for a continuous flow of work. It works really good if you have, maybe tickets or something coming into a queue for your team to work on, and there's always work coming into that queue. So that's what I mean by a continuous flow of work. Whereas Scrum works really well when you're building something new or you're being innovative. So Scrum, you're working iteratively and incrementally, and you're generally typically teams work for sprints that are 2 weeks long. So you're working on 2 weeks creating some value for your organization. So you'll do something for 2 weeks, implement it, look at how it went, learn from that, and then you'll do something again for another 2 weeks. And so that's why we say it's a little bit more innovative, because you're trying something, learning from it, and then you're improving and repeating the process, that cycle. So those are the two main reasons I would say when you want to use Kanban versus Scrum. But there's a little more too. So Kanban is a build your own agile approach. And what I mean by that is you can take an existing process for your team and you can put Kanban over it and make it an agile method. When you do that, it does require a lot of discipline, right? Because there are some practices in Kanban if you're doing the method, and if you're not really adhering to those, you're likely just using a Kanban board instead of using Kanban as a framework. So it does require discipline. It is a little harder. I typically wouldn't recommend Kanban for a team starting Agile for the first time. Now, Scrum, on the other hand, Scrum is a really great starter kit for being Agile. It comes and it has all of the roles, and it has all of the events, it has your product artifacts, it has a quick 15-page Scrum guide. That said, you do want to have someone, your Scrum Master specifically, more experienced in Scrum hopefully, but it is a starter kit, has everything you need to do Agile well. So that's my recommendations on Kanban versus Scrum. Don't want to spend too much time here, so we're going to keep moving. Next up, Kanban in general. Let's dive a little bit more into Kanban, focus on it. Kanban, it's a Japanese word. I believe it means signboard, and it's really big. And it started out with lean manufacturing, and Kanban has a really big focus on flow. So what I mean by that is you're trying to look at how work flows through what they call a value stream. What it takes to take that piece of work from ideation to a finished product. So you're taking it from beginning to end, and you're looking at the flow of it. You're looking at it at every step in your process to create that value that you get at the end of your value stream. So Kanban really focuses on that and has a big focus on improving that. So that's what I mean by it's focused on flow. So I mentioned Kanban is a build your own. So to elaborate on that a little bit, right? Kanban has no defined roles. You'll often see there are 2 roles that people recommend with Kanban. There is a service request manager and a service delivery manager. Now, the request manager is more along the lines of a product owner. But again, you don't have to have these roles. These are just stuff that have become more of the best practice when doing Kanban. So that request manager, again, it's more of a product owner type role. It's someone looking at all of the work coming in and making sure that it's prioritized and the most important things are going to be worked on first. The service delivery manager is also similar to a Scrum role, and that is the Scrum Master. That role is all about making sure that the team is being agile, they're following their practices, they help facilitate. It's really, someone who can take a step back and look at things objectively through an agile lens. That role in Kanban is also sometimes called an Agile coach, which can be a little confusing because Agile coach can mean something else as well. But just know service delivery manager is sort of the scrum master for Kanban. Service request manager is the product owner. But those are the two roles that you would have if you're going to have these defined roles. And of course, there's team members, doing the work. But again, they could have any role. They don't have to have this team member role. It could be anything. So that's the roles. So next, build your own thing is the boards. So Kanban is really awesome because you take a process and you say, okay, what are all of the steps in our process? And then you create that into a board and you capture all of that. So you can create a board custom to your process. Let's say you made pizza, right? If you're making pizza, you're probably making dough. So that would be the first step. Well, actually, we'd back it up, right? We'd want to take an order. That would be the first step in making a pizza. We'd want to know what we want with this pizza. That's step 1. Step 2, gather all the materials to make it, right? Your toppings, your sauce, your dough, all that stuff, grab it. Step 3, you make the dough into a round pizza. Step 4, you add sauce, cheese, toppings, you add all the stuff. Step 5, you cook it. Step 6, you take it out and cut it. Step 7, you're done. That could be a board, right? So now let's talk about rules. So rules are also build your own because each one of those steps in the pizza example, you would want to have rules on those so that the entire team knows, hey, this is what it means to be done gathering the materials for a pizza, right? If we're going to say, hey, when we gather the materials, we need to have these things done so everyone does it the same way, that's a pretty important thing, right? We don't want to have somebody named Bob running around grabbing all of the stuff but leaving it in the package on the table. Maybe we want to have the rule be you have to open the package. So that way, we make that clear rule, so that way Bob doesn't just grab it and leave it in a package. He actually portions it out. Maybe like there's a cup of mushrooms, there's 60 pepperoni slices or something crazy like that. Maybe the rule is we have these things measured out when we gather the materials into the right quantities. So it's important to have rules. It really lets you know when you're done with a step in your process. And then lastly here on the build your own thing is the 6 practices. Now there are practices in Kanban and they give you leeway on how you do stuff. There's 6 of them. You should really follow these practices if you want to be doing Kanban as a framework. And we'll jump into these practices in a little bit, but just know that most of the practices say like you have to do something like limit work in progress. Well, that means that your team has to come up with a way to do that. So there's a lot of build your own in Kanban. And like I said, this is a difficult one because you really got to have good discipline to do these things correctly and be an agile team that's successful. All right, so let's talk about the 6 practices of Kanban, and this is what really makes it a method. So the first one is to visualize, right? In Kanban, we want to have a board with all of our steps. We want to have our items on that board that we're working on. We want to have rules about each step on our board, each column on our board. And that's really what we mean by visualize. We want to really be able to visualize the work with our Kanban board. Next up is limit work in progress. So this is an important one because we all know that multitasking, right, it makes you inefficient, right? If I'm switching between doing 3 different tasks, I'm not doing any one task as fast as I could be. So limiting work in progress is important in Kanban. You can do this a number of ways. You can do this by person. You can do this by column on your board. So you can't have more than 3 things in a column. Or again, you can do it by person so they can't be working on more than 1 or 2 items at a time. And there are best practices on how to limit work in progress. There's lots of approaches to this, so it's worth looking up if you're wondering about it. I'm not going to get into that in detail here. But just know we do want to limit work in progress. Next up, manage flow. So when I think of manage flow, I always like to talk about Gordon Ramsay here, right? Because if anybody's ever watched Hell's Kitchen, you'll see Gordon Ramsay, and he'll have the the blue team versus the red team, and they'll be cooking, and one person always throughout the show gets overloaded and they become a bottleneck, right? And so you want to manage that flow. You want to manage the bottleneck. So if we're in that kitchen and someone's overloaded, right? as a team, we need to do something to change that up. We need to come together as the blue or red team, help them get through, whatever's causing the blockage or backup, maybe do some stuff with them. We want to manage that flow well, and we want to learn from that, right? We want to eliminate bottlenecks in our process. But that's what managing the flow is all about, making sure we have a streamlined process where things are going to flow through it pretty efficiently. Next up, make policies explicit. So this is an important one. We want to make sure that our rules and how we're working together is known by all team members and shared by all team members. So a lot of times here you'll find that teams will write down the rules to each column saying, hey, to be done with work in this column, we must do these things. That would be an example of making policies explicit. And then you could have something overall too, like for the overall piece of work to be done, it must meet these things, right? If you're in the software business, maybe it's, we've done all of our testing, we've implemented it, we've done any, follow-up validations, and it's done. And that's what we call done. So that would be an example of a done policy. Next up here is implement feedback loops. So this is really important in any process, in my opinion. But you always want to have feedback loops. You want to have areas where you're learning, where you have a chance to hear and get feedback on what's going wrong. A lot of times with Kanban, I would recommend that the team meet at a minimum once a month to talk about what's going on, how things are going. But it shouldn't just be limited to that. As a team, you can come together once a month, but maybe you're having a feedback loop with, stakeholders, bi-weekly or something like that. You have a person assigned who's working with the stakeholders to get that feedback. So you should look at different ways to have feedback loops when it comes to Kanban. Again, lots of methods here. You can research them all. But you should be looking to have those as much as needed as a team. And I should say one of the popular ones too here is like a daily stand-up in Scrum. A lot of teams that do Kanban don't choose to have it be a daily stand-up. Maybe they'll do it once or twice a week. But that would be another example of a feedback loop, right? The team's coming together, we're talking, there's an opportunity for feedback. So that's another one. And last up is improve. So Kanban is all about improving flow, right? You're taking an existing process, you're putting it into a Kanban framework, you've got your steps there. So you're going to start looking at, hey, where are things going slow? Where could things be streamlined, right? You might find that there's a step in your process that if you just did something different, it would change the world of this process and you'd be able to create value so much faster. So you should always be really interrogating that flow of work and looking to improve it. And there's a lot of metrics you can use in Kanban to capture information that would be useful for improving. So I definitely recommend, again, looking up those different metrics. I'm not going to go into that here, but there's lots of good stuff that can support improving your value stream in Kanban. All right, so we're going to take a look at an example here. So in this example, we have let's call it a mom and pop shop postcard company, a little small business that creates postcards. On here, you can see that we visualized the process of creating the postcards and getting them out to customers. First, we have our to-do, so we take our orders. Then we have our creates. So here's where we'd be actually creating the postcard itself, the art, the card. Then we would have package. So this would be where we take things up, package them, get the address on who these are going to. Then we have send. So this would be where we would take them to a post office or some other, drop-off location to send them out. Then we have done. This would be for completed items. So that would be an example of a board in the columns. And here you can see there are 4 items on this board. So there are 4 postcards, in the queue or being worked on right now. Now, if this was a good Kanban team, they would have work in progress limits here. So next to the to-do, you might see in parentheses like, we can't take more than 10 orders just because then we're setting unrealistic expectations for our customers. Or maybe in create, we don't want to have more than 3 going on. So again, you can have those work in progress limits on the column themselves or with the people that are doing the work. If it's a small team, I might recommend, I guess it's different for every scenario, right? That's the reality with a lot of these agile teams is you want to do what works for the team, right? You're supposed to empower the team with these frameworks, let them configure it for how it works best. So I'm not going to make a recommendation for this shop. I would let them, and I'd help them, work with them, and guide them on what works best in regards to work in progress limits to be effective. Also, for being a good team, we want to have clear rules for done for each of these columns. So what does it mean to be done with creating the card, right? That means it's probably printed out. It's been quality checked. It looks nice. There's no mistakes on it. And it's ready to go. And they printed out maybe postcards, they're coming in stacks of 10 or something. Maybe that means all 10 are good and we've looked at all 10 and they're set aside, ready to be packaged. Maybe that's what it means to be done with create. With package, right? This one would be a little more obvious. It's in an envelope. It has the address on it. It's sealed. That would be done in package. And again, having these definitions of done like per column here, this is important because it level sets with everybody doing the work, right? My done for packaging isn't different from somebody else's done. So when I say I'm done and they say they're done, and we assume that it can go to the next column, that's what's going to happen and it's going to work, right? That's what we want with these explicit rules for each column. So yeah, that's an example of a board. It's nice and simple. These boards can be, they can range to just 3 columns to do active done, or they can be more elaborate with different steps. You can use swim lanes. So, if you're a team that like deals with, IT incidents, you could have a swim lane that says like top priority, like this is the top priority and there can only be one thing in this lane. Then you have a swim lane for all of the other stuff, right? So there's lots you can do with how you configure your board, how you make it look. A lot of the software that is virtual and has these boards virtually just has a ton of great stuff. You're going to want to research, like a lot of them can change the color of cards, right, based on the time it's been in a column. If for some reason card 3 is sitting in package and we keep ignoring it for 5 days, maybe we turn it red. There's all kinds of cool things you can do with this software to really help streamline your approach. So anyways, that's Kanban quickly. Hopefully this was insightful and helpful. Obviously, I would appreciate likes and subscribes. Give me comments on how to improve going forward, and comment if I missed anything.